Welcome to Veteran Resource Podcast, where you will meet nonprofit organizations focused on improving the lives of veterans and their family members. Here is your host, Jeremy Paris.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 85 of the Veteran Resource Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Paris. We've got something special for you on today's Thought Leader Thursday. One thing that I know about veterans, you guys have a lot of stories. In fact, I've sat down with many of you at the bar during a Warrior Wednesday and listened to story after story after story. And each one of those by itself could have been its own book. They were that good. Well, today I have A.C. Fuller on, who is an author, and he's going to be talking about how you can get those stories out of your head and into a book where you can self-publish it and sell it on Amazon. And so he's going to go through the steps for how to make that happen. A.C. Fuller is the author of The Anonymous Source and the creator and host of the Writer 2.0 podcast, a weekly interview show featuring award-winning writers and publishing experts. He teaches English at Northwest Indian College near Seattle and has taught journalism at New York University. He has worked as a freelance reporter for the Poughkeepsie Journal and New York Newsday. He holds a master's degree in journalism from NYU and a bachelor's degree from Oberlin College, where he received the John D. Lewis Prize for highest honors in political theory. Previously, he was a professional chef specializing in catering. He lives in the Pacific Northwest with his wife and 2 children and is hard at work on the sequel to The Anonymous Source. All right, let's jump right into the interview. AC, welcome to the Veteran Resource Podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me.
It's always nice having another podcaster on the show. The quality is always nice and easy, and for somebody who doesn't normally podcast, there might be some nerves or something like that. But for a fellow podcaster, I always know it's going to be good.
I know I have the same experience when I've interviewed podcasters on my podcast. Is they always have a good microphone and they're usually pretty good at talking.
And we're going to talk about your podcast in just a second. But before we do, I wanted to kind of get into your background a little bit. Can you kind of give us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I was a chef in my 20s. And I really just was doing that to pay the bills. I had a daughter fairly young, and my wife was in nursing school. And I went to graduate school for journalism, and I thought I was going to be a journalist, and I was a freelance journalist for a while, though I was still a catering chef to pay the bills. Then I got hired to teach journalism at NYU, New York University, in New York City. So I taught in the journalism school there for a couple of years. I taught all the law that relates to journalism, so First Amendment law, news gathering law, stuff like libel and defamation and all that stuff. And I taught writing and journalism history, media history. So I did that for a few years. I worked at a conference center for a couple of years, and then my wife and I moved out to the West Coast near Seattle, the Pacific Northwest, mostly because I wanted to get really serious about my own writing. And it's something I had been doing throughout my 20s, and I'd always known I wanted to do. I'd started novels, I'd started short stories, I'd started some nonfiction projects, and never really had the oomph to stick with them and finish them. And so I knew I wanted to get serious, and we wanted to live out here where it's fairly inexpensive and quiet. So then I just started writing really seriously. I teach at a small college out here. I teach English, but that's only part-time. My wife works full-time as a nurse, so that frees me up to do a lot with the kids and to spend a lot of time writing and thinking about writing and talking to other writers on my podcast. And my first novel came out in June of 2015. That's called The Anonymous Source. My publisher then went out of business. And since then, I have relaunched the book in my own imprint. I'm self-publishing, and I have 3 more books coming out in the next 3 months. The sequel to The Anonymous Source, a prequel, and a book of short stories. And I'm really fired up, if you can't tell, about the self-publishing process, because I've learned so much about the business and met all sorts of great editors and cover designers. So I can put out a really a professional product while retaining the control and more of the profits for myself. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell. I just love talking about writing, both the business and the craft, and I'm excited to talk to your listeners.
That's great. Getting into your podcast, this is Writer 2.0.
Yes.
Where did that come from?
Well, I actually don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out. It just came to me one day. I think that there was a book that I saw go by on the shelves called Man 2.0. It's like a diet and fitness and health book about the male body and kind of to, exercises to do to boost your testosterone and some diet. I didn't even read the book, but the book was called Man 2.0. And the whole idea is, kind of upgrading, like you would upgrade your software from Microsoft Word version 9.0 to Microsoft Word version 10 or whatever. So the whole idea is in that book was upgrade from, original man to more of a, modern man. I don't really know.
Right.
The idea with Writer
next level
2.0 is exact next level. That's the idea. So with Writer 2.0, the idea is that we're living right now in a time of completely revolutionary change in the book business and the writing business. And we have been for the last 10 or 15 years, but in particular the last, say, 7 to 10 years, ebooks and Amazon and other digital platforms have completely changed the way the publishing business works, and it's changing the way writers work and authors work. And so I wanted to reflect that in the title, and also just I thought it sounded cool.
Gotcha. And that's part of the reason what you just mentioned is why I wanted you on this podcast. Was I was specifically looking for somebody that can help people like me and some others in my listenership who might have a book or might have an idea for something creative in their head, and they just don't know, what are the steps to taking that in and actually making it into a book, something that I could publish and getting it out there for somebody who's not a writer, for somebody who's never written a book, or even a lot of these veterans coming out, they've got some amazing stories. If there's one thing I know about veterans, they're pretty good storytellers. And so taking that story and actually putting it on paper, many of them have never even thought that that's something that they would want to do. And now all of a sudden, you're seeing a lot of the books coming out from the veterans. And so a lot of veterans coming out are like, you know what, I've got a book too. I've got a book that I could put out, but they don't know the steps. And so I went out specifically looking for somebody that knew the publishing world, they knew the self-publishing world, and they had some experience with it and could kind of guide us through what it takes to do that. So that's why I brought you on.
Yeah, and I can just go ahead and start at the beginning, and we can kind of walk through the process a little bit. If that sounds good. You want me to, so I would say the number one thing is it starts with the writing. And what I would say to that is I was never in the military. I have friends who were, relatives who were. I wasn't in the military, but I would imagine that there are a lot of different stories that different people have coming out of the military, or for those who are listening who are still in the military. I know, for example, a couple writers who write military science fiction, for example, which is a very hot genre right now. So sci-fi books with a heavy military angle. And that could be a story someone might want to tell. There's also obviously nonfiction stories. You're talking about a PTSD topic. There's memoirs that could happen. There's all sorts of different kinds of books that could be inside someone who is in the military or has been in the military. So the very first step is really to think about what is the book you actually want to write. What is the book you feel passionate about, compelled about? What's keeping you up at night or getting you up early in the morning? I would start there for most people. There are some people who really want to make a living as a writer, and some of them decide very early on, I'm not going to do what AC just said. I'm going to find out what genres are selling, and I'm going to write that.
Right.
Just because I want to be a professional writer, and it's called writing to market. And that is something people do. Most people are not successful with that, because for most people, if you're trying to write to a market that you're not passionate about or knowledgeable about, it's not very easy to be successful at that. I do know people who are successful, but I would say, especially if you're trying to write your first book, if you're newer to writing, starting in a place that you feel passionate about is a really good place to start. And that will be totally different for different people. And then just start writing. And for most people, what they find is they get stuck on a couple different things. One is they procrastinate. The folks I know who have been in the military or are in the military don't have this problem as much as other folks.
Right.
They tend to be a little more disciplined. I don't know. Have you found that to be true?
I definitely have found that to be true. They once they set their mind on doing something, they start to kind of regiment it out. Here's what I'm going to do every morning. I'm going to wake up and I'm going to, start writing or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and honestly, that is one of the things a lot of writers lack. They might have all sorts of great ideas and even great talent, but not the discipline needed to sit down and do it every day, which is a huge part of success as a writer. No matter how much talent you have or how many brilliant ideas you have, if you don't sit down and do it consistently, you will never finish a book, and you will not be successful as a writer. So that is a great place to start. For most people, starting with a word count that you're aiming at every day is a good place to start. For some people, that's 300 words a day. For some people, it's 500 words a day. So in your Microsoft Word program, or if you're using a program that I use called Scrivener, which is a great tool we can talk about, or any other program, just setting a daily word target is a great place to start. It might be a weekly word target if you work strange hours and you work long shifts some days that you can't write. I started off with trying to write 3,500 words per week. That's 500 words a day, 7 days a week. If you multiply that out and you're trying to write a full-length novel, say, you can write a first draft of your first novel in 25 or 30 weeks, 6 months. Sounds doable.
Right.
And really, you'll find 500 is a reasonable expectation for newer writers. I try to write 2,000 to 3,000 words a day now, but that's because I've been doing it a long time. There's no right way to start. Some writers will find it easy to write 500 words and some will really struggle with it. It also depends what kind of book you're writing. Usually novel writers tend to write a little faster because they're writing more dialogue. If you're writing, a detailed history of a particular aircraft, for example, that might go a little bit more slowly because there's lots of research involved in that.
Right.
Whereas if you're writing a romance novel, they tend to be a little more formulaic, more dialogue, and you're going to write that faster. So these are just all ballpark numbers I'm throwing out. But starting with a dedicated writing practice and just deciding this is what I'm going to do, I'm going to write this book, that's the place to start.
And AC, when you were when you were first starting out and you were doing 500 words per day, did you find that when you were hitting that 500 mark that your mind was already kind of on fire and you just ended up pushing way past what you were planning on doing that day? Or did you pretty much keep it structured that okay, I'm somewhere around my mark, I'm going to wait until tomorrow to pick this up?
I was more the latter, but it was largely because at that time I was teaching full time, had 2 young kids,
Gotcha.
and I didn't have the military discipline, but I got it from somewhere. So my only writing time was between 5 and 7 a.m. every day. That was my only option. So I realized this was in my early 30s. Okay, if I don't write at this time, I'm not going to be a writer. And so I really want to be a writer. I want to make a living at this. So it's going to be at that time period. And so I didn't have time to write much more than that at that time. A couple hours was what it took for me to write 500 words. Now I might write 2,000 words in the same period of time, but it was a hard slog at the beginning. But I tended to just stop because I had to go to work and the kids were waking up and I had to cook breakfast. Now I might write a lot longer and my life is a little more flexible.
Gotcha.
But it's different for different writers. Some people find that they will write in binges of thousands of words, or in some cases tens of thousands of words. I know people who will write 10, 20,000 words in a day, which is,
Wow.
100 pages of a novel, which is insane. But starting out, for most people, just finding some kind of disciplined, regular way to do it is the best way, largely because a lot of our stories, whether they're memoirs or novels or whatever they are, come from places that are not immediately conscious. So like if you do something over and over again, it just becomes habit, and you sit down at the computer and it just starts flowing out. If you start and stop and you don't do it every day, the process tends to be much, much more difficult. Probably like with, any serious exercise. If you go running every single day, it just gets easier and easier. If you try to run once a week, each time it's going to feel really difficult when you start back up. It's kind of like
Right.
that.
That makes sense. I've heard in some of the groups, some people saying that when you're first doing a book, don't edit until you have the complete first draft done. Do you agree with that?
I do, especially for newer writers. I absolutely agree with that. For my first book, I was so full of self-doubt, which a lot of writers are, that I just didn't think my story was worthy. And a lot of writers will struggle with that. I hope your listeners don't, but if they do, the solution to that is just write it. Get the thing out of your mind, out of your body, write it down, don't look back, just keep going. Because what happens is we compare our first draft. If we go back and read it and start editing it, we'll compare it to some book that inspired us. Let's say we love, I don't know, the Harry Potter series or something, and we want to write a book about a kid wizard. We write our first chapter and then we read it, and it's not nearly as good as the Harry Potter series because that was her 20th draft and had a professional editor, and she's much more experienced. And so then we get down on ourselves. So for your first book especially, I definitely recommend just writing it, getting it out of your system. You're going to go back and edit it later. You're probably going to have multiple drafts. You're probably going to have a professional editor, but just get it done.
Excellent. And you mentioned earlier about using Microsoft Word or Scrivener, or you could even use a Google Doc or something like that.
Yeah.
Do you recommend that people jump into Scrivener, or do you think that just using anything is fine?
I think that the number one thing is to just start writing, like immediately. Like pause the podcast and write your first 500 words right now. And that can be on paper, in anything you have. That's the number one thing. I do think Scrivener is better for most people. The one caveat to that is that if you're not someone who is decent at learning new software, just stick with what you're comfortable with. If you've always used Microsoft Word or Google Docs, stick with that unless you're comfortable learning something new. Scrivener, the reason it's better for a lot of writers is that it allows for non-linear writing because you can compose in scenes. So it's not just from the beginning to end and you scroll down. You can drag and drop scenes. You can move things around. You can keep photos and videos and research and maps in one document in cool folders. So it's just a great system for writers. So I would say if you think you're going to be at this a while, spend the 20 or 40 bucks and get Scrivener and learn it. I just like to caution people, because for some people who don't like learning new software, it's a bit of a learning curve. There are great free videos on YouTube, though, that teach people how to use it.
Excellent. Yeah. And I actually purchased it myself a while back when there was a sale going on, and I've been holding on to it knowing that I'm going to use it, but I haven't, jumped into it yet to learn it. And you mentioned a couple of weeks ago that just jump in and look at some of the videos on YouTube, and you'll start to learn how to use it. And that's what I've been doing. There's a ton out there. So, I would say that's great advice.
And yeah, I think it can really be learned. And especially if you're someone who might want to write multiple books, it can be useful in a lot of ways, because from Scrivener, you can export any kind of document. You can turn it into a Microsoft Word document if you're working with an editor, or you want to send it to your grandma who doesn't have Scrivener but will read it in Microsoft Word. And you can also export it as an actual ebook. So Scrivener lets you save your file as what's called a MOBI file, which is the file format used by the entire Amazon Kindle platform, which is by far the most popular platform on earth for ebooks. So you can if you want to get fancy, you can format an actual ebook that then you can self-publish on Amazon right from Scrivener. And there are other programs that allow you to do that in more complicated ways. But for a basic ebook, you can do everything in Scrivener. You can also save it as what's called an EPUB file, which allows you to publish it on all the other platforms, like the iBooks platform, which is the Apple Books platform, Kobo, and various others.
Gotcha. So for your book, Anonymous Source, you've had, with that one single book, the experience of having it traditionally published and also self-publishing. Is that correct?
Right. Yes, it
Which
is.
Most people don't do that.
No, most people don't. My publisher was a small Seattle-based publisher, so you could say it was traditionally published, but they called themselves a hybrid publisher, so they had a slightly different model than, say, Random House or Simon and Schuster, or one of the big New York publishers.
Oh, gotcha.
But yeah, basically I went through that process. They were trying something a little new. It didn't work. They went out of business. Luckily, I retained the rights to the book, so I could just self-publish it. And that's been working out quite a bit better so far. That was just maybe about a month ago I self-published it.
And so do you have any plans in the future of going back to traditional, or are you just totally in love with the self-publishing now?
Man, I'm in love with self-publishing because it turns out I'm a bit of a control freak. I like help. I like, have a professional cover designer, an editor, a proofreader. So it's not that I want to do everything myself. I just don't. Sometimes with a traditional publisher, you lose elements of control, and that can be not good if the people don't know what they're doing. I would definitely traditionally publish under just the right circumstances. There are a few publishers I would want to work with. The thing, though, is it really depends on what you're writing. So for me, there are a few publishers who do really well for mysteries and thrillers, which is what I write. And I would want to work with them under the right circumstances. However, it's not like it was 10 years ago where self-publishing is a last resort kind of thing, which is how it was viewed up until fairly recently. More and more authors are choosing to leave their traditional publishers like a Simon and Schuster or Random House to self-publish. And that's because A, they retain more control, and B, they retain a much higher share of the royalties. So one of the big fights that's going on behind the scenes in the publishing world right now is that publishers want to keep most of the royalties from the sale of an ebook, and more authors are selling more and more ebooks, obviously, because of things like Kindle and iPads. And so Amazon, if you self-publish, lets you keep 70% of the royalty for your ebook. My book right now is $5, $4.99 on Amazon. I get $3.50 when I sell a copy. So 70% of the royalties, as opposed to if I'd published with Simon and Schuster, I might get 10% instead of 70%. Of course, Simon and Schuster would have paid me a big advance, but it gets complicated and we don't have to go too far down into the weeds. But for most writers, in most cases now, self-publishing is a really good option and can often lead to traditional publishing too, if they're successful.
Right, and I've heard somebody talking about that in one of the groups I was in, where they put out their book themselves. They self-published for Kindle, and then it had such success that they had traditional publishers coming to them saying that they wanted to publish the book, and he worked out agreements with them to where they would publish the hard copy and allow him to still sell the Kindle version on his own. So he was able to do both.
Right. That is a great story. And that's happened to multiple people. And the really cool thing is that's great for that writer, because one of the things traditional publishers can offer is distribution of paperbacks. So right now, if you walk into your local bookstore, you're not going to see my book there because they only, in most cases, unless it's special requested, have books from traditional publishers, and they don't even have very many books from traditional publishers. So partnering with a traditional publisher for bookstore distribution, airport distribution, that kind of thing is really good for paperbacks. And I would love to get to that point at some point. But then retaining the higher royalty percentage for ebooks is very good too. A lot of books that people have heard of, like 50 Shades of Grey, The Martian, which was the Matt Damon movie a couple of years ago, the Hugh Howey series, Wool, those were self-published books, and then they got picked up by traditional publishers with varying deals. I don't know all the details. I think Wool got picked up. Maybe it was one of Hugh Howey's other books. But this is more and more common when people have big success through self-publishing, that they partner with a traditional publisher, and each deal is unique in that context.
Gotcha. And there's ways also, I understand, like even with Amazon, for your Kindle book, that you can get like printing on demand in some cases.
Oh yeah, that's very easy. My book is available as a beautiful paperback. Most people are doing that. What you do is, it's called Create Space, and it's a company that's owned by Amazon. It's a printing company, and essentially you upload a slightly different version of the book formatted for print, and a cover that has front and back cover rather than just front cover like an ebook, and then they print it on demand. And so every time someone goes to Amazon and orders a paperback copy of my book, or a million others that are done the same way, someone at Amazon hits print, or probably a computer hits print, and it comes right out and it gets shipped, and it takes 24 hours or less. And they're really high quality books. They used to be, 10 years ago, print on demand books were pretty crummy looking, and now they look amazing. Really high quality paper, really high quality covers. So that it's totally changed what's possible for authors, because you used to have to order a big print run if you were self-published.
Right.
You'd order 1,000 copies, and they'd be sitting in your garage while you tried to sell them out of the back of your car. Meanwhile, you've spent $5,000 on your first 1,000 copies. With CreateSpace, which is then tied into Amazon, you pay zero. You pay exactly nothing. You upload the files, and every time a copy of my book gets printed, I'm going to get, when Amazon sells it, I think I get, the book's $13.95. I think I get $3.50. It costs $5 to print, and then Amazon keeps a couple bucks, something like that.
Gotcha.
But the upside is no financial risk for me or for the other, millions of self-published books out there.
Right. And for the person who's buying the book, they see no difference when they go to your book on Amazon. They could see, they could even be looking at the ebook, and it'll say, we have this in other forms or whatever, and it'll have the other option for you right there. So nice and easy.
And more readers just don't care. There are readers who still care if a book is self-published, but I think that number is dwindling.
Yeah.
And as the quality has gone up for self-published books, and more traditionally published authors are self-publishing, the quality just keeps going up and up. So readers just don't care as much.
And so
they just want good stories.
Yeah, absolutely true. Absolutely true. Do you find, or do you use that same thing, CreateSpace, for when you're doing like book signings or tours or anything like that?
Yeah, I do a lot of events where I'm talking, and then there's usually books for sale in the back of the room. And what I do is I have, and I also do giveaways and things like that. And my wife's a nurse, and she sells books to her coworkers and all sorts of people. She's a great sales lady. Anyway, you can order from CreateSpace your own book. So you upload the files. They go up for sale on Amazon once you're ready, once you've reviewed it and everything. And then I can order as many copies as I want at the printing cost. So I don't have to pay full price. So I can order 100 copies, and I only pay $5 or $6 per copy. And then I can sell them for whatever I want at my events, which I do. And easy.
Very nice. Very nice. And you have them shipped directly to the event, so that
you can do that, or I usually, it depends where I'm going. I usually have them shipped to my house, and I just bring 10 or 20 copies with me.
Gotcha.
If you were someone who's doing big events, where you probably have some listeners who are going to be giving talks for 1,000 people at a conference, then you could get a lot more copies shipped straight to the event.
Very nice. Very nice. So you started walking us through, and I interrupted you with tons of questions, but the standard process. Yeah. Yeah, just the standard process that somebody would normally take to publish through Kindle. Could you just kind of step through that?
Yes, absolutely. So, assuming you've written a book, I would definitely recommend getting it read by multiple people who will give you honest feedback. So, not just friends and family, but other people also. I definitely recommend hiring a professional editor, or if you have someone you know who's a professional editor, get them to help you. So the quality of the book is as good as you can possibly make it, because the only downside of self-publishing is some people can jump the gun and publish a book before it's really ready, and then they can get a lot of bad reviews if it's full of typos and things like that. So you want to have a professional book in terms of the writing. Then what the process is you get the book laid out. And so assuming you want a paperback and an ebook, you're going to have two different layouts. One is a PDF file, which is the paperback that you're going to upload to CreateSpace. That's a PDF which you can create in Microsoft Word. There's all sorts of free templates online to make it look cool, or you can hire a layout person who will charge you, between $50 and $200 to lay it out for you. Then you're also going to have it laid out for ebook format. So if you want to be on Amazon, you have to have a Mobi file. If you want to be on any other ebook seller, you need an EPUB file. Those are things, again, you can do yourself. You can learn them yourself. If you're a tech person, it's fairly easy to learn them yourself. But again, for $100, you can hire someone to do that. There's a million people online who will do it for you and do a professional job. So then you have the files. You go to KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing. That is the Amazon platform. And then there's a few others like Smashwords and Direct to Digital, which will allow you to publish everywhere else other than Amazon. iTunes, so you're in the iBook store, Kobo, etc. And you're really just going to create an account and you upload the files. Around the same time that you're doing the layout, you want to hire a cover designer. If you are a brilliant artist, you might be able to do this yourself, but covers are absolutely critical, because if a book doesn't look good when someone is scrolling on their phone, and if it doesn't look good at a 3-inch by 2-inch size, most people just won't click, no matter how much they won't even bother to read the review unless the cover is good. So there's a lot of good resources online about how to find good cover designers, but you're going to pay anywhere between $50 and $1,000 for a good cover. I pay my cover designer about $100 per cover, and we go back and forth, and she's a real artist. I am not a visual artist, but I know what looks good, and I ask 10 or 20 people. I get feedback from people who read in the genre, so we fine tune it. But you want to have a professional cover. And then you're just going to upload the cover to CreateSpace or to Kindle Direct Publishing or to Smashwords or to all three, depending on where you want your book published. And once you've uploaded the cover and the file, you actually just hit publish. And then within 24 or 48 hours, the book is available, kind of like magic. I actually just hit publish this morning on my book of short stories, and by the time we get off this interview, it may be available for sale on Amazon. It's really that easy once you have the file finished and the cover finished.
Wow. And that's it. It's up there.
That's really the process. I mean, I skipped through a lot because, of course, without a really good book that's been well edited and worked over, it doesn't matter that much. Although there's a lot of books that are more successful than mine that a lot of people think aren't any good. So if the story is compelling enough, sometimes it doesn't matter if they're well edited or not. I mean, the first few versions of 50 Shades of Grey apparently were absolutely terribly written, and it didn't matter because they took off anyway because of the content, and went on to sell millions of copies. Not my style of book, but they're definitely someone's style of book because they sold a lot.
Right. Wow. I took a course that was for getting your book out there a while back, and the guy who wrote Wool, Hugh Howey, he was talking about how he started out he just had a little novella, and he threw it out there just to put it out there and have it available. And he wasn't really thinking it was going to take off too much, and it went crazy. Everybody was buying this. So this is a much shorter book. Have you found different successes with the lengths of books?
Yeah, so right at this moment, I only have the one full-length book out. I'm coming out with a novella in 3 weeks, which is a novella is usually considered somewhere between 20,000 words and maybe 40,000 words. So if you're used to reading typical science fiction or mysteries or thrillers, those might be 80 or 100,000 words. So a novella would be, a 75 to 100 page book. And yeah, Hugh and a lot of other people have had tremendous success with that. Especially a lot of people will use it just to test the market, by which I mean they'll put out a very short book. Maybe they have in mind some longer novels in the same world with the same characters or similar characters, and they'll just see if people like it. And if nobody likes it, they'll just try something else. And that's working really well for some people. Other people, like there's one example, Mark Dawson, who writes thrillers in the kind of the Lee Child style. He wrote a novella that he gives it away for free just to get people interested in his full-length books. So the idea is this is really a marketing tactic, and it's actually what I'm going to be doing and what more and more people are doing now who are trying to make money off this and have more than one book, is you essentially give away a novella for free, and you try to give away hundreds of thousands of copies of it. And then obviously people, if you are good, they'll get connected to your characters, to your writing style. Then they'll go buy 6 of your other books. That's what Mark Dawson and a lot of people are doing these days. And that's why there's so much free stuff on Amazon. And a lot of it is actually really good. So definitely novellas can work. It depends a little bit on the genre. I've been told by some romance writers that their novellas don't sell as well as they wish they did, and not as well as their full-length novels. But in my case, I'm not planning on selling a lot. I'm planning on giving away tens of thousands of copies, and people will then, I hope, get interested in the series and go buy the rest of them.
Very nice. It's a great idea. And that's kind of just scratching the surface for marketing. Once you have your book in Amazon, from what I understand, if you do nothing but put it up there, then there's a really good chance that you're not going to sell anything. Is that true?
That's very true. There's a very good chance you won't sell anything. If you're someone who is already famous and has a massive audience from something else you've done, you might sell some books. But most of us aren't that way. And so, yeah, marketing is an entirely different journey. And the giving away something for free is one thing a lot of people are doing. It could be a short story or a novella. Some people make whole novels free. So like if I had 10 books in my series, 10 full-length novels, maybe I'll have that 3 years from now. I might decide, just from a business standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, to give away the entire book of the anonymous source, which took me 2 years and is worth more than free, but I might decide to give it away for free just to get people hooked on the series in hopes that they'll go buy the other 9 books in the series. That's what a lot of writers are doing. So that's one marketing technique. There's also, there's a lot. There's too many to name all of them, but people use Facebook ads to drive people to their books. They use Amazon ads. Amazon now has ads. If you go to the book page of any book on Amazon, you'll see sponsored ads there now. Building a mailing list is usually considered the number one way now. So it depends on what sort of book you're writing. But, let's say you're writing a book on military history. You might also want to have a blog about military history that is, you're giving away some of your content for free. So writing blog posts about military history. And then while people are on your website, there's a little banner on the side that says, here's the link to go buy my full-length book. Of course, people use podcasts to market their books. There's a million ways, in-person events. It really depends on what your exact book is. But marketing is crucial. Without it, most books these days just don't sell.
And do you recommend marketing before the book is published?
Yeah, I would never. It depends. If you're someone who just wants to put out a book just for your family members or just to have a book out there and you don't really care if it sells, then Godspeed, just put it out there. If you're someone who really wants to make money at it or just get your book to the widest audience, I would start thinking about your marketing at least 6 months before the book is going to come out. And depending on the type of book, I would be implementing different strategies months before the book comes out to start building an audience. If it's a nonfiction book, a blog where you're giving away some of the content in the book, maybe a podcast, Facebook groups, things like that. If you're writing novels, it's a little trickier, but publishing short stories that are for free before the novel comes out, giving away a novella, building a mailing list, at least 6 months in advance if you possibly can, if you really want the book to make a little bit of a splash when it comes out.
Excellent. And the way I understand it is Amazon is a search engine just like Google is. And in fact, it's like the number 3 search engine or something like that. And most people don't look at it that way. They look at it as a place to go and buy stuff, but it has an algorithm that it's looking at to figure out what it's going to show you based on what you're looking for, what your preferences are, what you've searched for before, and the rankings of how people look at these books and things. So there's definitely an art to getting your book to rise above the rest of the ones in your category. Is that accurate?
There definitely is. Yeah. And that's why I'd recommend anyone who is writing a book right now and they know they want to reach a big audience with it, I'd recommend immediately going to Facebook or maybe another social media platform. And if Facebook is what I found to be best, and joining a few Facebook groups. There's a Writer 2.0 Facebook group. Pat's First Kindle group is where you and I connected.
Yeah, that's great.
There's a group called 20 Books to 50K, which is a phenomenal self-publishing group, probably the best on the entire internet right now. Just really helpful, knowledgeable people. Some people who are making $100,000 a month self-publishing and just sharing all their secrets for free. Just incredible resources out there. So I would go join all of these groups and just start soaking in the information because there's so much to learn and it's such an exciting time. You want to start learning it before you put your book out, if you possibly can.
Excellent advice. And you, aside from doing this, you mentioned that you're teaching as well, and you're also doing workshops. Is that correct?
I am. Yeah, I'm doing actually my first day-long solo workshop in March. I think it's March 18th, near Seattle in a little town called Paulsbo. That's all about how to write your first book. Actually, it's or your second or third book, but it's about story structure, character arc. I'm going to talk about things like procrastination and the inner critic that keeps some people from writing or gets them stuck. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the publishing business at that. So I'm going to be doing that, and I'll probably be teaching this summer at a bunch of conferences. But I'm so in the weeds with my own books, I'm not thinking that far ahead just yet.
Excellent. Well, if somebody wanted to, if somebody's in the Seattle area and they're listening to this episode and they're like, wow, I'm loving all of this information I'm getting, I would like to dig in a little bit more and maybe check out this workshop. How would they get in contact with you?
So they can email me, ac@acfuller.com, or that particular workshop, I'm not actually putting it on. It's put on by Gamble Creek Studio. So if they just go to gamblecreekstudio.com and then click on workshop series, it'll be right there. So that, but I'm not handling the registration for that, but it's a nice little venue. It's going to be an intimate 10 or 12 person workshop and should be a lot of fun. And they can also find me on Facebook. I announce all this stuff there. Facebook.com/ACFullerAuthor is where I post all that stuff.
And you've got The Inverted Pyramid coming out as well, which is the second book in the series, the Anonymous Source series. Is that correct?
That's right. April 26th.
Very nice. And I saw the cover art for that. Very beautiful.
Yeah, I love my cover designer. She had a tough task because my last cover designer was with the publishing company I was with. Oh. And so, of course, we wanted it to look as like part of a series. So she had to copy the style while, of course, making a new cover. So I was really happy with what she did. People can find that on my Facebook page too. And I'm excited. Finishing touches on this book, and it's going to be out in April. And then I've got another one, the Mockingbird Drive, that will be out probably in July, and whole bunch of stuff coming in the next few months.
Oh, that's outstanding. I'm going to go in and grab Anonymous Source myself and start down the path. Since it's the first one in the series, I know it's going to be one of those that's going to lock me in, and I'll be hooked. So that's how I like to start.
I hope so. I hope so. It's, people say it's a page turner. That's what I was going for. So I hope you enjoy it.
Very nice, very nice. Is there any other advice that you can give to the veteran listeners out there about getting the book out of their head?
The number one thing I would say is, if you have any of the voices telling you not to do it, do anything you can not to listen to those voices. Do it anyway. Of course, if there are things you are not allowed to divulge because of military regulations, I'm not saying ignore those, obviously. But if it's something you're allowed to write it, and do it, start immediately. Like, don't put it off. Go write 300 words and try to write 300 words tomorrow and 300 words the next day. You'll never regret having done it. I don't know anyone who says, I really wish I hadn't written that book. I've never met anyone who says that. It always changes your life to write your first book. It completely changed my life, and I know it will change the life of anyone listening to this, to actually do it. And whether it turns into huge literary success or not, it's still worth doing. And whether it's a book that will have a huge audience or a small audience, it's still worth doing. So I would just say, go do it. And while you're writing, learn as much as you can about publishing and the publishing business through those groups I mentioned. My podcast is good for that. There's the self-publishing podcast is phenomenal for that, which I'm not involved with, but is another great podcast. And there's others out there that there's just so much good free information out there if this is a road you want to walk down.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, AC. I've learned a ton, and I am definitely going to put on my calendar a word count every day that I'm going to be trying to hit, because I am also working on a book. So thank you. Thank you again for coming on the show.
Oh, you're very welcome. You asked great questions, and I'm happy to come back anytime. I love talking about this stuff. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. As always, make sure you go over to the show notes. You can find those at veteranresourcepodcast.com/085, and you will find all of the information about how to get connected with AC Fuller. Get over to his website and definitely check out his podcast. He's got a bunch of episodes there that you're going to love. It's all going to help you to get that story out of your head and into a book, just like he's done. I'm so glad that AC agreed to come on the show and share with us so much value and actionable tips. That's all I have for you today. I will see you next week for episode 86.